Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Is this the year we see bankers burned at the stake or something else? Stacy Herbert.
Well, Max, they have a lot of excuses this year for justifying their behavior. The first one, Corzine, another victim of the alpha male curse. This is from William D. Cohen of Bloomberg. And he says, for years I have wondered why, for some people, enough is never enough. For example, what could have possibly motivated John Corzine, a respected former senator, governor, and Wall Street big shot with hundreds of millions in the bank, to take the top job at MF Global Holdings in the first place? It was a thankless task, he said, but he's an alpha male, and that's why he's done what he's done.
Okay, so let me get this straight. They're excusing Corzine, his crimes. Let's be, clear about this. They're crimes because he's an alpha male, correct? Mm-hmm. So this is John Corzine's story, the cojones defense.
Yes.
So this is different than the Frank Quattroni defense. Remember, he got off because his crimes were too complicated for a jury to understand, so he was free by virtue of complication of his crimes. Here, the cojones defense.
That's correct. Many women in the U.S. have successfully argued that the premenstrual, the PMS defense for murder. So here's his defense, is he's got big cojones, and that's why he's murdered this company, this 237-year-old company. He had to destroy the brokerage because of this big problem he has.
Well, I'm surprised we don't see more female CEOs of banks. There's no female equivalent of Jamie Dimon or Lloyd Blankfein if they're using PMS as a defense to get themselves off for crimes. If they can get themselves off for financial crimes using the PMS defense, why is it only the big cojones defense get off? Why can't the PMS defense get off? Like a Hillary Clinton, for example, if she ran a bank, she could say, well, maybe not so much anymore, but,
Well, you have to be a big cojones to get away with this, though. This defense only works for a certain class of people. Now, in the next headline, we have a woman. Why was the wife of Switzerland's central banker trading francs days before a devaluation? So this is from Bruce Crasting, a former hedge fund manager, and he's noting that Kasia, the wife of Philip Hildebrand, the head of the Swiss National Bank, sold Swiss francs just a few days before the Swiss National Bank initiated exchange controls and devalued the franc. The timing of the transactions was nearly perfect. The suggestion is that pillow talk between husband and wife led to the trades. Now, however, Max, he says don't expect heads to roll because there's been an investigation and they've cleared the couple because they only made $50,000 in the month. And Philip Hildebrand makes $950,000 as the head of the Swiss National Bank. So he wouldn't possibly do this because he has so much money and he wouldn't want to jeopardize his career.
Yeah, this brings up a lot of interesting story. Wealth equals moral superiority. That's an interesting byproduct of this economic system that has engulfed the globe, is that the more money you have, the more morally virtuous you are, and you become above the law. That's why people like you run these banks believe that they're above the law, or they're doing God's work, as Blankfein would say, because he has a lot of wealth, therefore he's closer to God. And now you've got the wife of some Swiss central banker saying, well, it's $50,000, we make much more than that per year, so it's not a crime, because we have enough money, we have more money than God. Therefore, we determine what's legal, what is moral, and therefore we're innocent. That's the first point that should be made. The second point that should be made is that if she's a witch, and I suspect that she is, then I suggest we load her up with a ton of derivatives contracts and drop her into a lake in Switzerland. If she drops to the bottom and drowns, that means that maybe she wasn't a witch, but we've gotten rid of one more kleptomaniac. But if she floats to the top, then she is a witch. Then we burn her at the stake and forget the PMS defense.
But this could go a very long way towards explaining why in the U.S. no bankers have been found guilty, because they earn far more than $950,000. That's the little bad apples in America who get done. They're only making like $950,000 at the reception desk at Goldman Sachs. So they're the ones that get sent down. Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, they're making $25–30 million a year. So that means technically it's impossible. If they have a knife in their hand that's all bloodied and a dozen dead people in front of them, they cannot have committed the crime because they are wealthy.
Absolutely right. Jamie Dimon could take a machine gun and murder 50 people at Walmart, and people would say, see, he's God. Only God could do that.
There is another excuse being offered in the U.S., and that is that the government ate my homework. This is from Michael Thomas, The Big Lie. Wall Street has destroyed the wonder that was America. Michael Thomas is a former banker. He was at Lehman Brothers for 30 years. He was a partner there. And he's saying that now the excuse that bankers use over and over whenever there's a giant crisis, this is the government's fault. Somehow regulations forced us to steal all your money, to take your money, your segregated accounts, to leverage up 100 to 1. The government forced us to do that. We wouldn't have done that on our own saintly selves. But Michael Thomas says, once people realize how Wall Street made its pile, understand how financiers get rich, and what it is that they actually do, the time will become ripe for someone to gather the spreading ripples of anger and perplexity into a focused tsunami of retribution, to make the bastards pay properly for the grief and woe they have caused. Perhaps not to the extent proposed by H.L. Mencken, who wrote that when a bank fails, the first order of business should be to hang as board of directors, but in a manner which in pain is proportionate to the collateral damage. So he says maybe, Max, don't smile like that. He's saying, you know, maybe it might not be as bad as H.L. Mencken's let's hang the bankers, but he's saying, he does say later, there will be blood. Make no doubt about it, there will be blood, because there is no justice in the system, that the bankers are just getting away with every single crime.
Well, a lot of people ask me, they say, Max, you know so much about banking. Why aren't you doing banking? How come you're not on Wall Street if you know so much? Because the risk is you're going to get torched, you're going to get hung, you're going to get shot, you're going to get beaten up by the mob. During the Reign of Terror, I think they killed 45,000 people. I mean, on a percentage of the population, that works out to, I think, about 1% of France at the time. Applying those numbers to America, we've got a long way to go, upwards to 300,000 of these guys. I don't want to be burned to death by the folks that are seeking retribution for the wholesale thievery. I'd rather not take that risk. Blankfein and Diamond and the rest of Wall Street, they're happy with that risk. I say, good for you, take that risk, but you and your family are taking an enormous risk.
At the end of the day, he says, the convulsion to come won't really be about Wall Street's derivatives malfactions or its subprime fun and games or rogue trading or the folly of banks. It will be about this society's final opportunity to rip away the paralyzing shackles of corruption or else dwell forever in a neo-feudal social order. So obviously he watches Keiser Report here, and this is the important thing. Forget all the other fancy schmancy stuff. It's about feudalism, whether or not you want to be a serf forever, or do you want to have enlightenment again?
Well, that's exactly another theme on this show, neo-feudalism, that's been picked up by other commentators along the way. As the power aggregates to the top 1% of the 1%, the bottom 99.9% end up living like serfs on the Lord's manor. And, of course, throughout history, there's been a rebellion against this.
Well, talking about the Lord's manor, over Christmas, the Archbishop of Canterbury blasted for comparing rioters and bankers as politicians urge him to focus on religion and said, so again, here was something that you first heard here on Keiser Report. Max Keiser, you compared the bankers, the looters in the city of London, to the looters in the summer over in London proper, where they were rampaging across the city, stealing stuff from Dixon's and Tesco and various shops. Well, the Archbishop of Canterbury also compared them in his Christmas address. He said, whether it is an urban rioter mindlessly burning down a small shop that serves his community, or a speculator turning his back on the question of who bears the ultimate cost for his acquisitive adventures in the virtual reality of today's financial world, the picture is of atoms spinning apart in the dark.
Finance is the new religion. And we know this from how monetary policy is conducted when they flood the market with trillions of immaculately conceived dollars that come out of the loins of the Virgin Mary, Ben Bernanke.
Now, here is how David Cameron's government chose to hit back. Who did they appoint to speak? Lord Green of Hurstpierpoint. Lord Green, he says, oh, poppycock, this is not true, Archbishop. I think a lot has changed since 2008, actually, and I think there has been a lot of soul-searching in the financial services industry. Quite rightly, too. Jolly good.
Look, Lord Ding Dong, take the watercress sandwich out of your swing and face reality, okay? Your entire city's being burned down by terrorist bankers. And you're out there in the club with Cameron rubbing uglies when you should be doing something productive.
And then they go on to mention Lord Green, a former chairman of HSBC, said the government would need to remain watchful to stop backsliding by the city, but he said it was wrong to single out the financial services industry for criticism. He said it is important not to treat banking like some special mysterious art. Banking is a business, and all businesses face this question: what is their contribution to human welfare and to the common good?
What kind of dope is this guy smoking?
Max, let's go back to Michael Thomas. Here's a former partner at Lehman Brothers. And when he was talking about the big lie, see, the big lie, nowhere on earth is the lie bigger than in the UK. Because there is no government regulation at all. Zero of the City of London. Nothing, okay? They could do whatever they want. That's why every single crime, as we exposed last year over and over in 2011, the Bernie Madoff fraud, the Lehman fraud, the AIG fraud, all frauds go through London. MF Global went through London. Because they won't do, remember, the Tobin tax is the big issue that David Cameron has basically ejected the UK from the European Union. Now, Michael Thomas said possibly an excess profits tax retroactive to 2007 or some form of Tobin tax on transactions or wealth tax. The era of money for nothing will be over. That's what he says. But it won't stop at taxes at all, because the people who have been defrauded and the people who do not get justice, because there is a Queen, there is a Prince Philip, there is a Ben Bernanke, there is a Mervyn King, there are these people standing between you and your wealth. They allow for the bankers to steal your wealth over and over and over, and they will not ever do anything to stop it. So there will be prosecutions and show trials, says Michael Thomas. There will be violence, mark my words, he says. Houses burnt, property defaced. I just hope that this time the mob targets the right people in Wall Street and in Washington. How does a right-thinking Christian go about asking Santa for Mitch McConnell's head under the Christmas tree?
All right, stay right there. We'll be back. Much more coming your way after this.
I had a family. I lived in a fairly nice community. It wasn't rich. It wasn't upscale. It was just like, Archie Bunker society, okay? Then they started showing up. What happened was, my company decided I could get cheap labor, and they got rid of us.
Statue of Liberty is they're welcoming all migrants that came to this land.
Legally. We have to get up every morning, we have to go to work, and, we have to pay our bills, and we have to do it, and that's just the American dream, and if you want the American dream, you have to go by the laws, I figure.
This here is one of the major trails into the United States,
I've watched them, they run down my property.
Something about this noise bothers people.
Stopping the cockroaches from coming over the wire is protecting the country.
I'm the kind of guy who doesn't mind getting his pants dirty, so I come out here,
We're all immigrants, and we know that. We all came from somewhere else.
Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Stacy Herbert, we were talking about retribution, of course.
We were talking about retribution, and I have some very good headlines on that coming up. But first, I want to start with a very important story to this theme we're talking about here. And let's turn to this tweet that I tweeted at Stacy Herbert, twitter.com/Stacy Herbert in the new year. As Obama was signing into law his right to indefinitely detain me, he also sent me an email asking for $3. So this was the National Defense Authorization Act, otherwise known as the Indefinite Detention Act, which he signed into law on New Year's Eve. And at the same exact time, Max, he sent me this email. As you see, he was asking me, begging me for $3. Normally, you would just, put this in the spam box, but then you start to think, well, am I going to be indefinitely detained if I don't give him money?
Well, also in America, they charge prisoners for stuff like the tin cup and the uniform and food. So they charge the prisoners to enter prison. So NDAA turns America into an open prison. It's declared martial law. And the people who are being sent to prison, Americans, are being charged a few bucks to be confined to the prison cells.
You know, they've already taken enough money from the citizens. They've taken the money in order to bail out his cronies on Wall Street, who he will refuse to, once again, in a second term, prosecute. So why would any citizen who he can now indefinitely detain want to send him $3? The number one catastrophic event that Americans worry about, economic collapse. So a new survey by Lifeline finds, as most other polls before, that the American voter is most concerned about economic collapse. 63% of them place this as their number one concern. Then followed by natural disaster, 46% are concerned about that. Terrorist attack, all the way down to 44%. Global disease outbreak, 33%. Global war, 27%. And yet, where are all of the presidential nomination debates focused on? Foreign policy, war, 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 war. That's all they want is war, 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 war. And indefinitely detain us. Terrorism, terrorism, terrorism. Do they ever talk about economic collapse and who's causing it?
No, they don't. They don't talk about it at all for a good reason. As has been said in the past, if the people really understood how the system worked, they would rise up and go after all the bankers. And this is trying to be prevented by any means possible, including starting spurious foreign wars, which end up committing huge genocidal acts of murder and mayhem, which, of course, can't be paid for by the revenues of the country, so they go deeper into debt.
Now, the other thing, part and parcel with this, that this article talks about, is how financial sector shares did last year. Now, this is another part of the propaganda against the American citizen, is over and over again you'll hear that gold was a disaster last year, it performed horribly. Well, it was one of the number one performing assets in the world. Gold was up 11.6%. Now, here's what financial sector shares did. Bank of America down 60%, Citibank down almost 45%, Goldman Sachs down 46%, JP Morgan down 23%, Lloyd's down 63%, Societe Generale down 60%. So huge declines in financial sector. But the end of the year stories were all about gold and how that gold had done somehow miserably.
Well, as we've been saying on the show, Stacy, gold is really the honest way to have an economy based on an honest money system. And the honesty is in a bear market in America. Honesty is being sold short by the leaders of America, who now can trade on inside information in new ways that were never possible before. So honesty is the last thing you find in America. And of course this means that people don't like gold.
But gold is a protection against the bankers stealing your wealth. Now, here's the next headline, Max. Probably not related, but ... arson in L.A. This is Carl Denninger, and he's talking about those 40 cars that were burned in L.A. over the New Year's holidays. And he says, while you're sipping your beverage of choice this evening, consider again that while this is probably one deranged individual, there are millions of screwed over individuals that have taken it in the backside from the big banksters, who have incidentally gone without prosecution. Indeed, our own president claims that no laws were broken. He then goes on to say he's very concerned. He thinks people are at the breaking point, and he uses the example of Jefferson County, Alabama, which was part of an open racket, the local politicians who accepted bribes from JP Morgan. Well, he said even if 0.1% of the population there starts burning cars in retaliation against JP Morgan, you have a big crisis on your hands.
Right. Well, why is this such a huge leap to make if the banks with Obama steal the nation's wealth? Then they're going to have people who are disenfranchised rising up, and burning cars is one way to get their voice heard. Their voices are not being heard at the ballot box, or they don't have any jobs. They were all stolen. They don't have any money. It was all stolen. And the thieving is continuing when the pension funds are going to be thieved this year, and a lot more of the nightmarish larceny will continue. Of course, they're going to have burned cars, but they don't make the connection, do they? They don't make the connection between burning cars in L.A. and now there's some more arson going on the East Coast as well, I was just reading about, with the confiscation of wealth by banks. They don't make that connection because they have no humility at that banking level that believes that they're somehow doing God's work, and they have a God complex, so they don't make that connection. But this is why they're at risk of themselves being burned at the stake, which is my bet for 2012, is that we'll see banker burnings at the stake.
Okay, there's another article about these arson attacks that happened. Man saw an arson attack. And the interesting thing about this is, as we were relating to what the Archbishop of Canterbury said about the UK, where he's linking the banking crimes to the crimes on the street. And in this, they point out that the fires in Hollywood are similar to those that occurred in July in North Hollywood, when there were 21 fires that broke out. Now, they caught the guy in this case. He's Kurt K. Billy, a former Marine. And the interesting thing about this, though, is that he's about to go to trial, and if convicted, he faces life in prison for burning 21 cars. At most, what is that, $200,000 in damage if they were all Lamborghinis. Now, what about the bankers who have burned down our economy and cost trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in damage? And all they face is like a piddly little fines.
Yes, and this is what we're saying. This is what I'm trying to impart onto the audience, is that the risks of being a banker are not worth the rewards anymore. If you've got disgruntled, disenfranchised citizens armed looking for you, that's not an acceptable risk. This is why I stay away from that business. I want to live.
But this is what the Homeland Security is about. Again, they're owned by J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs. Local cops ready for war with Homeland Security-funded military weapons. Fargo, North Dakota's largest city, has averaged fewer than 2 homicides a year since 2005. And yet that hasn't stopped authorities in Fargo and its surrounding county from going on an $8 million buying spree to arm police officers with the sort of gear once reserved only for soldiers fighting foreign wars. This is part of the $34 billion in federal grants since the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Now, people are saying, this is crazy, our police is being militarized. And to that, William Bratton, who is a Homeland Security advisor, says, I don't see us as militarizing police. I see us as keeping abreast with society, and we are a gun-crazy society. So this is why we need to spend $34 billion on military-grade weapons to defend us from the population who we know, because we're the Department of Justice and we're not going to prosecute the bankers. We know we need these military-grade weapons to defend ourselves from the angry people.
Sure. I mean, when Obama made his famous speech in Cairo, when he first became president, I think the people in Egypt thought he was talking, maybe they should embrace democratic values. But what I think they missed was that he wants America to be more like Egypt, where there's a kleptocracy in charge and people get beaten in the street for no reason other than they don't want to be poor and abused by their government anymore. So I think people misunderstood the point of Obama's speech. She was stumping for Mubarak's ideas, and now he's embraced them in America. So America is the new Mubarak regime. Obama's the new Mubarak. America is the new Egypt. Where are the camels with the sticks beating people in the street? I'm sure it'll be on Fox News shortly.
Well, that's not enough for the military-industrial complex racket. Here you've got Fargo, North Dakota. Less than 2 homicides per year. I guess only 1.5 people die a year there since 2005. And yet they're buying tanks. They're buying Kevlar that could take, like, grenade attacks. So what is this about? But it's not about terrorism, because first of all, the population itself says they're more concerned about economic collapse. No money is going into preventing economic terrorists. Nobody is stopping the banking terrorists at all.
No, I'll tell you what it's about. It's about making money based on the size of the budget of the project that you're involved with. If Fargo can say that they need $20 billion in weapons to defend themselves against a couple of carjackers, somebody's going to make a 2% fee on a $20 billion procurement. So this is why it's Hollywood accounting gone crazy all over America. So you've got towns all over America thinking we need $1 billion in deterrence and security measures and weapons because somebody at the municipality is getting a fee on that $1 billion as their bonus for the year. Same thing with Wall Street. Why does the government need to float another $1 trillion worth of debt, according to Obama? Because somebody in Wall Street is making a 0.002% fee, which is a great little year-end bonus. It's a nice little money earner. Let's load up the boat with another 5. You know, America's got over $15 trillion in debt now. I mean, that's just to generate banking fees for these same kleptocrats who only methodology of doing business is to use the near 0% interest rates to rack up near infinite levels of debt, whether it's the military, whether it's the banking system. But God forbid it has anything to do with manufacturing or services or infrastructure. Those things are taboo, because those things are for living, breathing, sentient, democratically minded humans. When a country of drones and obese, foie gras farm-loving, fat slobs puts up an idiot in the White House, this is what happens.
Well, and then finally on J.P. Morgan, you know, they were at a school of the 1%, Princeton, you know, trying to recruit students, and Princeton students stood up and basically did this to J.P. Morgan.
Mic check! Mic check! Princeton's motto is? Princeton's motto is? In the nation's service and service of all nations! In the nation's service and service of all nations! J.P. Morgan, change your actions violate our motto!
J.P. Morgan, change your actions violate our motto!
Your predatory lending practices helped crash our economy.
Your predatory lending practices helped crash our economy.
We bailed out your executives' bonuses.
We bailed out your executives' bonuses.
You evicted struggling homeowners while taking their tax money.
Yeah, and most of those students, of course, will soon be working for various Wall Street firms. So we can't really place them. But maybe one of them. Maybe one of them is sincere and will become the new Rousseau or John Locke or revolutionary of note throughout history and spark the necessary declaration of independence from banking occupation needed to bring about a whirlwind change and the emergence of something that would be resembling of a free and democratic country, which right now in the world there are none.
That's right, and it looks like Michael Thomas is right. The people are ready to rise up, and you know, J.P. Morgan might be in a precarious situation going forward. They'll long for the days of Pecora Commission, as Michael Thomas says.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. Stacy Herbert, thanks very much.
Thank you, Max.
If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying, bye, y'all.